This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Nita Hone, and it's Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. In today's video, I'm going to be looking at the modal cards that have made the biggest impact on Magic's competitive scene. I've been meaning to do this list for a while now, but it kept getting put on the back burner. But the new modal cards in Theros Beyond Death finally gave me the push to take a look at this. A modal card is a card that, well, has multiple modes and gives you options. Most modal cards have the words choose one, or choose two, or choose one or more, and then a hyphen in the text box followed by the options. Modal cards frequently have charm or command somewhere in their name too, but that isn't true of all of them, as we'll see. Modal cards are highly flexible, and that is something that makes them quite powerful. As we'll see as we move through the list, modal cards give you options that are going to be good in a variety of situations, and this allows modal cards to be played optimally in a wider array of situations than your typical card that only does one thing. Before we get started, a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. Pro Tour and Mythic Championship top 8s are worth 2 points, as well as Legacy and Vintage Championship top 8s, and a Grand Prix top 8 is worth 1 point. Now, let's get started. At number 10, it's Deceiver X Ark, the only creature to make this list. However, the X Ark does have flash, making it feel a little less like a creature. The X Ark gives you the option of either untapping one of your permanents or tapping one of your opponents. Most famously, Deceiver X Ark has been combined with Splinter Twin to create an infinite combo. This was done the most in Modern, but X Ark also earned points alongside Splinter Twin in Standard and Legacy. If you put Splinter Twin on the X Ark and then choose to untap the X Ark with the Splinter Twin copy, you make infinite X Arks with haste and swing for lethal. Now, it might seem like people are only ever choosing a single option with this, and that's true when it came to the combo, but the tap option was also chosen pretty frequently. You could flash the X Ark in at the end of your opponent's turn to tap down a problem permanent or a land, making it a little harder for your opponent to interact with what you're going to do on your turn, at which point it's much safer to play Splinter Twin and go off. Splinter Twin got banned in Modern in early 2016, and Deceiver X Ark hasn't seen play since then. At number 9, we have Azureus Charm, the first charm we've seen on this list. Charms first debuted way back in Mirage, and traditionally, a card with Charm in the name gives you 3 options, and you have to choose one of them. Azureus Charm doesn't break with tradition there. The 3 options it gives you all have their place. Giving lifelink to your whole team is sometimes enough to help you win a race, drawing a card is something you can do when you're really trying to dig for something, and the ability to put an attacking or blocking creature on top of your opponent's library can provide some nice tempo. Now, as is often the case with modal cards, it doesn't do any of these things super efficiently, but the flexibility makes that fine. In both block and standard, Azureus Charm was featured regularly in Control decks. While the charm has 0 points since rotating out of standard, it might have a chance of putting up some points in Pioneer, where it has been featured in some Control decks, as well as Hour of Promise ramp decks. At number 8, we have another charm, Abzan Charm. Again, like all charms, Abzan Charm gives you 3 modes, and you choose one of them. Abzan Charm can let you exile large creatures, draw you a couple cards, or put +1/+1 counters on your creature, and it can do all of that at instant speed. Abzan Charm is a good example of designs for modal cards because it has a couple of sort of narrow effects. You won't always have a target to exile, and you won't always have creatures who want +1/+1 counters, or creatures who are worth putting +1/+1 counters on. When you can do either of those, it will feel pretty good. But you won't always be able to utilize those modes, so it also comes with a fairly broad ability, the one that draws you cards. This means Abzan Charm will pretty much always be useful, and that's a good hallmark of a good modal card. Abzan Charm was mostly played in standard Abzan decks, which it helped make into the most dominant deck of that standard. It also has a single point in Modern from back in 2015. Like Azureus Charm, it may get an opportunity to add to its score in the upcoming Pioneer Premier events. At number 7, I have Collective Brutality. Brutality gives you 3 choices, but you can actually choose more than one of them if you're willing to pay the escalate cost, which in this case, you have to discard a card for each mode beyond the first that you choose. The options on Brutality are pretty nice, though like a lot of modal cards, they are individually not that impressive for 2 mana. But hey, it still has that flexibility. Sometimes going after your opponent's hand is what you need to do, and other times you need to kill a small creature or drain your opponent's remaining 2 life. But the power of Brutality comes from its ability to escalate, as most of the time when you cast this, you're usually choosing at least 2 modes. The fact you have to discard cards for those modes does prevent you from achieving a 2-for-1 or anything, but discarding cards that aren't really doing anything for you to choose one of the options on this card that will do something for you is pretty nice. Throughout its existence, the decks that best take advantage of collective brutality are those that actually want to discard cards for various reasons. In those cases, brutality can be particularly brutal because your opponent isn't really giving up resources in order to choose multiple options. In Standard, it was featured in Delirium and Zombie decks, both of which could use the graveyard as a resource. Modern is where it has gotten its most points, though, by a wide margin, and it's been featured there in graveyard decks like Reanimator, Dredge, and Hollow One, as well as in decks with more of a graveyard sub-theme, like Jund and Death's Shadow. In Legacy, it has a single point in a Reanimator deck. Collective Brutality also got its first Vintage Championship top 8 just a few months ago in a Storm deck. Brutality will continue to add to its score, and it seems to have a shot at moving up this list going forward. At number 6, we have Kolaghan's Command, our first command on the list. Commands made their debut in Lorwyn, and pretty much any card with command in the name gives you 4 options, from which you get to choose 2. This makes commands, in most cases, more powerful than charms. Kolaghan's Command gives you some pretty impressive value for only 3 mana, as any 2 options you choose will give you a 2-for-1 the vast majority of the time. If you destroy an artifact and make your opponent discard, you get 2 cards for the price of 1. The same is true if you do 2 damage to a creature and kill it, and return a creature from your graveyard to your hand, and you get the picture. All the options give you 2 cards. It's also nice that it lets you run some mainboard artifact hate, because even if that option is irrelevant, you still have 3 good ones remaining. This power has led Kolaghan's Command to see play in multiple formats. In Standard, it was played in a pretty wide variety of decks. This included more aggressive decks as well as control decks. It has found the most success in Modern, finding its way into most decks that are playing both black and red. This has included combo decks like Splinter Twin and Living End, mid-range decks like Jund, control decks like Grixis, and aggro decks like Death's Shadow. There's not really a good reason not to have a Kolaghan's Command or 2 in your 75 cards in Modern. It has also found success in Legacy, where it's been featured in Delver and 4-color control. The command will continue to add to its score, and has a good chance to pass some of the cards in front of it in the coming years. At number 5, we have Dromoka's Command, which of course gives you 4 options, from which you can choose 2. Dromoka's Command gives you some serious power for only 2 mana, and while it can't generate a 2-for-1 quite as consistently as Kolaghan's Command, it can still do it if the situation is right. For example, if your opponent has an enchantment, you can make your opponent sacrifice it, and then use one of your creatures to fight one of their creatures. You can also set up blocks, make one of your creatures big enough to survive combat with the +1/+1 counter, and then use another creature to fight something else. So, there might be more hoops to jump through, but the fact that the fail case here is that it's a 2-mana instant speed hunt the week makes you feel pretty good about this card. While in Standard, Dromoka's Command was a format-defining card, as it was one of the most played cards in the entire format. It had no problem transitioning to new decks as others rotated out of the format. In its early days, it was mostly featured in Abzan, but then it moved on to decks like Megamorph, Green-White Tokens, and Collected Company. It also has a few points in Modern, where it's been used in Bogle's decks. Those decks tend to run creatures with hexproof, and the fight effect on the command is extra good when you know your opponent can't do anything to interact with it. It doesn't have any points since 2018, but this is another card to keep your eye on in Pioneer. At number 4, I actually have 4 cards, and this is because they're so similar to each other and because they all have tons of points. The blasts all give you a modal color hosing ability, either allowing you to destroy a permanent of the enemy color or counter a spell of the enemy color. Modality here is pretty nice because it means that if you draw this and your opponent has already played the card you're most afraid of, you can still deal with it, and if you draw it while waiting out something you're really afraid of, you can hold on to it to counter it later. Of these 4, Blue Elemental Blast would not have actually made the list, but I thought it still deserved to be mentioned with the other blasts. Pyroblast is a legit number 4, Red Elemental Blast would have been number 6, and Hydroblast would have been number 9. While these cards only hate on one single color, it's hard to outdo the efficiency of being able to do all of this for a single mana. As a result, over the years, these cards have seen tons of play in sideboards and Eternal formats, and they're going to continue to. At number 3, it's Umezawa's Jitte. The Jitte is one of the most powerful equipments in the entire game, and part of that power comes from its modality. The Jitte gains charge counters when the creature it is equipped to does damage, and you can then cash in those charge counters for one of 3 abilities. You can use them to pump your creature, you can use them to weaken and frequently kill your opponent's creature, and you can use them to gain life. One of the nasty things about GT is its controller can sit around accumulating counters and really put you in a bad spot because they have 3 different fairly impactful effects that they can use at any time for 0 mana. As a result of all this power, Umezawa's GT has been a multi-format all-star, achieving success in most formats in decks that run lots of creatures since they are necessary to power the GT. In block, standard, and extended, this meant it was primarily featured in a variety of aggro decks. The GT caused Extended to be a little too homogenous, and when the Modern format was created in 2011, the GT was put on the preemptive ban list, and it remains there to this day. And as a result, Modern is the only format where it doesn't have any points. However, the GT has gone on to lots of success in Legacy, where it is usually featured in decks running Stoneforge Mystic, since she can search up the powerful equipment whenever you think you might need it. The most popular homes for it have been Death and Taxes and Stoneblade. The GT has even found success in Vintage, where it's been featured in Eldrazi Aggro and Ravager Shops decks. Umezawa's GT will continue to put up points going forward, but so will the 2 cards in front of it, so number 3 may be the best Umezawa's GT can do. At number 2, it's Cryptic Command. This is the card that I figured would come in at number 1, but the command only makes it to number 2, and you're in for what I think is a pretty big surprise for number 1. At least I was surprised by it. But anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about Cryptic Command. It was part of the very first cycle of commands originally printed in Lorwyn. Like all commands, Cryptic gives you 4 choices and you can choose 2 of them. Like the other commands to make this list, Cryptic Command also enables 2-for-1s in addition to just being super flexible. It isn't hard to set up a 2-for-1 here either, as just choosing the counter and draw a card option will guarantee you one of those. The ability to bounce creatures can come in handy in a pinch, as can the ability to tap down all of your opponent's creatures. The counter draw card option may be the most common, but the other options have their place too. So yeah, this offers a lot of power and flexibility. The one downside about the command is the triple blue and the mana cost, but since it has achieved 165 points, it probably hasn't held it back too much. In block, standard, and extended, it was featured primarily in fairy decks, mono-blue aggro control decks that like to do everything at instant speed. In modern, where it has been most successful, it's played in just about any deck that can manage to pay the somewhat prohibitive mana cost. This has included blue-white control, Splinter Twin, Blue Moon, Scape Shift, and Grixis control. It is still actively putting up points, and there's a tight race between the number 1 and number 2 on this list, which should be interesting going forward. So, what's the surprising card at number 1? It is a Braid, which also happens to be the newest card on the list, with its first printing coming in 2017. So, it wasn't surprising to me that a Braid made this list, because I was aware it had considerable success in Standard, and had been played some in other formats. But it turns out I was really underestimating how many top 8s a Braid has achieved, especially outside of Standard. A Braid is another design that is pretty typical of Modal cards. It can do 3 damage to a creature for 2 mana, or it can destroy an artifact. It does not do either of those things very efficiently, but having a single card that can do both is great because it means you can have main board artifact hate that still does something against people without any artifacts. And artifact-heavy decks are relevant in pretty much every format, so that makes a Braid an attractive option. A Braid was a staple for red decks while it was in Standard because it offered a reasonably efficient removal spell that could destroy the plethora of problem artifacts in the format. While a Braid does have a ton of points in Standard, its flexibility has proven to be strong enough for non-rotating formats too. In Modern, it has gotten points in Through the Breach, Blue Moon, and Is It Phoenix decks. In Legacy, it has been played in Delver decks primarily, but it also has a few points in Canadian Threshold, Reanimator, and Show and Tell. A Braid even has points in the most powerful format of them all, Vintage, and that's the part that came as the biggest surprise to me. I don't feel like a Braid is the kind of card you look at and say, yeah, that's going to be played in Vintage, but that's a really good illustration of how powerful flexibility can be in this game. A Braid is still actively putting up points, and it doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon, so it'll be interesting to see whether a Braid or Cryptic Command comes out on top of this list in the long run. Well, that does it for this episode of MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to catch up on the ones I've already done, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.